Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Biology of Cells and Tissues. As always, if you could leave a like on the video, subscribe, comment if you have any questions down below, and I will get to them as soon as I can. We're going to be continuing right where we left off, talking about the uterine tubes, fallopian tubes, oviducts, all that kind of, all those AKAs for the same structure. So the uterine tube is a vital reproductive structure, and it facilitates the transport of eggs, gametes, and early embryos. That is its main job, is getting it into the uterus, from the ovary to the uterus. So it receives the egg, it provides the environment for fertilization, initial development, and it also transports that, what we call the conceptus or the zygote, where egg and sperm have already fused. We call that the conceptus or the zygote, and it brings it to the uterus. 4 regions: the infundibulum, ampulla, isthmus, intramural, and the intramural segment. Infundibulum, this is a funnel shape right next to the ovary. You can see the ovary and the fallopian tubes are actually not connected at all. So the eggs are released, and these structures called fimbriae, they're these finger-like projections. They almost kind of wisp and pull, and they kind of swoosh the egg towards the opening of the fallopian tube so that it can enter this first chunk, which is the infundibulum. The egg then continues to go down into the ampulla right here. This is the most common site of fertilization of the egg, and it makes up about 2/3 of the tube's length. This being the site of fertilization very often is an anatomy type question, and then the length of it is more of our histology, cells and tissues type question that they like to ask. The isthmus, this is the final portion. It is the narrow medial 1/3 of the tube located very close to the uterus, and this has thicker muscular walls in order to aid in transport of that conceptus. Conceptus, if it becomes fertilized, just the oocyte by itself if it did not end up getting fertilized. Finally, the intramural segment. This is the portion of the tube that actually traverses the uterine wall and opens into the uterine cavity. So this is between the isthmus, so this is all technically already the uterus. However, it's still part of that fallopian tube, so we call that the intramural segment in between the full fallopian tube structure and then the portion of the tube that is inside of the uterus lining, mostly the muscular lining of the uterus itself. Within the tube, it's 3 different layers. We have a mucosa layer, we have a muscularis layer, and then the outermost layer is serosa. The inner layer, it forms these structures called longitudinal folds. You can kind of see all of these little folds all through it. And this is, the way that this is sliced is it's as if we took, this is the tube right here, we made a slice right here, and now we're kind of looking into the tube. So the oocyte, could be cruising along at any portion of these longitudinal folds. It makes those longitudinal folds because it keeps a lot of open space, but also allows a lot more surface area for these ciliated cells. There are 2 main cell types. We have ciliated cells, and then we have our secretory or non-ciliated cells. The cilia, these are like those hair cells. They have a little wave-like motion. They essentially just kind of swoosh all the way through to move the oocyte towards the uterus. And then the non-ciliated cells, these provide nutrient-rich fluid to protect the oocyte, support the sperm fertilization with the egg, and then also provide nourishment to that zygote during the early development. So L, this is the lumen, and then we have all through here, right there. Again, we have some of the cells. We have the ciliated cells right there. The next layer, the muscularis layer, there's 2 layers of smooth muscle, an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. This should sound extremely familiar because this is exactly the same as in a lot of our GI system, where we have the inner circular layer and then an outer longitudinal layer. This also helps, so the cilia, are doing their swooshing, but the muscles also do kind of contract and do a little bit of peristalsis, like we talked about with the GI tract, where it kind of squeezes and pushes along. The muscularis layer of the fallopian tube does the same thing. It kind of squeezes and helps move the oocyte towards the uterus. Finally, the serosa is just the loose connective tissue covered by a layer of mesothelium on the very outside to provide, a nice smooth layer so that the uterine tube can move nicely within the whole cavity, and it can be protected on the outside. Now, talking about the uterus itself, we mainly identify two specific structures. We have the body of the uterus as well as the cervix, which is separating the uterus from the vaginal opening. And the top of the uterus is then also called the fundus. And we have three layers. Again, we have an endometrium, which is the mucosal layer, the myometrium, which is our muscular layer, and then the perimetrium, which is our serosa layer. The mucosal layer, the endometrial layer, is divided up into two layers, the functional layer, or the functionalis, and then the basal layer, or basalis. This basal layer remains constant. It's always the same. It doesn't get larger, doesn't get smaller. The basalis layer stays the same. This is where the stem cells are located that feed into the functional layer. This functional layer, this is what grows bigger during the preparation for implantation of the egg. So this is going to grow and grow and grow until, if there is no fertilized egg in order to implant, and then no formation of placenta and other things in order to keep this layer active, this whole functional layer is what's actually going to break off and make up the menstrual discharge. The bloody layer, all of this is the tissue that's sloughing off, that's coming off. As well, this whole layer, these layers are fed by a lot of vessels, mainly these vessels called the spiral arteries, and we'll see these pop up again just in a little bit. The muscular layer, this muscularis layer, this is the thickest layer of the uterine wall, and it has interlacing bundles of smooth muscle. So it's very, very muscular, very, very thick part of the uterus. And during pregnancy, with all of the hormones and stuff that are released when implantation and pregnancy begins, you get hyperplasia and hypertrophy of cells within this layer. So you get an increase in the actual number of cells, and then also an increase in the size of those cells. This is also why women, once they have been pregnant, oftentimes they will feel they will feel very different in their bodies. So one of the things, it takes a while for women post-birth to get used to their bodies again, because their uterus has actually changed size because they have additional muscle cells now within the uterus. It's actually bigger than it was before, and a lot of times that can kind of cause some mixed emotions, as well as some difficulty feeling like getting back to normal, because the uterus itself is actually larger in size and the body has changed in so many different ways that it takes a good amount of time to adjust to all of those changes and to those lasting changes. The job of this muscular layer, this is where all of our force, this contraction, comes in order to expel the fetus. It also contracts during menstruation in order to help expel the endometrial functional layer. This is one of the reasons when women do get their period each month, and they do get very intense cramps. Obviously, some women cramp much worse than others. A lot of times this is due to that contraction of this muscularis layer, and you can almost compare it to like the worst Charlie horse you've ever had in your life, or like if you had one of those like really, really bad calf cramps, but inside of the gut. So at least I should clarify, this is the way that my wife has described it. I spoke with her kind of about these points before we did this presentation to make sure I wasn't spewing made up facts or anything. But this is something that, with when you dive deeper into patient education, different ways of treating things, you'll find that one of the most common things that chiropractors treat is low back pain. And women who have very severe or very difficult menstrual cycles will often get associated low back pain, pain in the hips, pain in that whole region of the body due to all of this. So something that look into this a little bit more as well. But I've actually started, joining in some different content creators and stuff who get into a lot of this, as well as some people doing research, and they found that a big reason why women get really, really bad cramps, they often tend to be short on electrolytes as well as potentially dehydrated, which, as you're losing, you're not feeling great, so you don't want to eat, you don't want to drink, as well as you're losing a lot of fluid through the sloughing off of that functional layer. So things like drinking an electrolyte drink, drinking pickle juice, staying hydrated, all those kind of really good things can actually decrease the unpleasant contractions of the muscularis layer in the body. So lots and lots of cool stuff that you can learn and pull from all of this. Finally, that outer layer, the serosa, I'm not going to go very deep into it. It's just the outermost layer. It protects and anchors the uterus, and that's about it. Stages of the uterine cycle. So I go into this, I kind of touch on this, and then I actually have here at the end the full breakdown of what happens when, what hormone is released from where, and everything that's going on. I'm not going to go through all of this in this video. I have it laid out very, very clearly, so if you want to be able to see that, there's a link in the description below. You can get access to all of the notes and everything that you see in these videos, so feel free to take a look at those. Okay, so 3 main phases that we talk about: the menstrual phase, the proliferation phase, and then the secretory phase. Secretory meaning secretion type phase. So during the menstrual phase, this is about 4 days. Again, these are about rough numbers for every single person. It's going to be different. This is when the functional layer of the endometrium is sloughed off and expelled as menstrual blood. It's triggered by a rapid decline in hormones, specifically estrogen and progesterone. So this is kind of when that corpus luteum changes to the corpus albicans, and now the corpus albicans is no longer secreting estrogen and progesterone, and so the estrogen and progesterone levels drop, and that's when you get the beginning of the period. After the menstrual phase, you get the proliferation phase, where it builds back up that endometrial layer. So you get rising estrogen levels secreted by granulosa cells of the developing follicles, regeneration of glands and surface epithelium, and you also get revascularization or regeneration of blood vessels, those spiral arteries that we talked about. This is the rebuild phase. The secretory phase, again, is controlled by progesterone released from the corpus luteum, where glands become highly coiled and begin secreting glycoproteins and nutrients to hopefully nourish the implanting conceptus. So again, this is just a continuation. We get more growth, more secretions, more stuff kind of builds all through there. This is when the endometrium reaches its maximum thickness in order to prepare for potential implantation. And then if no implantation occurs because there was no fertilization, or sometimes in women, who don't have who don't have an egg release, like in the case of PCOS. This is why you can have much longer chunks of time between periods, or a very irregular cycle, because you're not having all of the proper hormones released at the different times in order to have these consistent phases. Things we want to know: we want to remember this is when it's maximum thickness. You have the glands, and they are secreting the glycoproteins and nutrients. As I forgot to highlight specific in here. Regeneration of glands, regeneration of blood vessels, stimulated by the estrogen levels. Those are the main key points that we want to remember here. Here's just some pictures, some of those uterine glands, how they grow. They get much more coiled, they get bigger, they're secreting a lot more stuff. Here are some of our main hormones in the stage of the whole cycle. And like I said, again, down here below, I break it all down piece by piece. And I do highly recommend that you go through this and understand it a little bit more now, as if you understand it at this level, any of the questions you can get asked on a test, you're going to be very, very confident in answering, as well as you're going to feel more confident in the future when you get to all of this material. Sounds good? And I know I said I wasn't going to go through it. This video is only currently 16 minutes. I think I have enough time that actually we can go through it in this one. So I'll go ahead and do that. So if you just want to know the information for this course's specific exam, you can end here. You're good to go. If you want to really dive into this, understand a little bit more, that's where we're going to start now. So the menstrual phase, we already kind of talked about it. That's the functional layer is shed because of the lack of hormonal support. The estrogen and progesterone levels decline, so we can see estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest, or one of their lowest levels at this point. These low hormone levels trigger the hypothalamus to release the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the pituitary gland to release follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone does exactly that. It stimulates the follicles. So the primordial follicles, they start to grow with the rise in FSH. Early proliferative phase, this is days 5 to 10. The endometrium starts to regenerate. Multiple follicles develop. One follicle is selected as the dominant follicle. This is the one that's going to end up being released. All of the other ones are going to go through atresia and get broken and get degenerated back down. The hormone from the hypothalamus, the gonadotropin releasing hormone, stimulates the FSH and then also luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. FSH stimulates the follicle growth and estrogen secretion. The luteinizing hormone stimulates the theca interna cells to produce androgens, which are then also converted to estrogen in the granulosa cells. So estrogen starts to rise. So we have here estrogen is our blue line. Estrogen starts to rise here, and it peaks during our proliferation phase. During the late follicular cell, this is when the estrogen peaks. The dominant follicle emerges, producing lots and lots of that estrogen. And you actually get a positive feedback loop on the hypothalamus to trigger a surge of luteinizing hormone around day 14. That spike in luteinizing hormone tells our body, the female body, to change from a follicle to a corpus luteum. So, to stimulate ovulation in order to enter the luteal phase. So that luteinizing hormone surge triggers ovulation. The follicle stimulating hormone also raises slightly but it's going to be suppressed by inhibin, which is released from the granulosa cells of the dominant follicle. And finally, those dominant follicles are maturing into Graafian follicles, and then they're going to be released on the fourth day. So that Graafian follicle ruptures, releasing the oocyte into the fallopian tube. Luteinizing hormone just peaks, which causes that follicle rupture, and then it becomes the corpus luteum. The luteal phase, the corpus luteum forms and secretes hormones. Endometrium thickens. Progesterone is secreted by the corpus luteum. And then estrogen is also secreted by the corpus luteum. So remember those two different parts. The progesterone is from the follicular cells, and the estrogen is from the theca interna. I'm going to double check that, just not 100% confident. Yeah, there we go. I have it reversed. Yeah. Follicular cells, this is why we check. Follicular cells, they produce the progesterone. I don't know how to write. Yeah, follicular cells produce the progesterone. The theca interna produces the estrogen. Progesterone, follicular cells. Good. Had wanted to make sure we're all good there. And then the corpus luteum is fully functional, secreting hormones, and that lasts for about 10 days. And if no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum regresses into the corpus albicans, and the hormone levels decline. With the decline of the progesterone and estrogen, the functional layer of the endometrium begins to degenerate, and that's when we finally get and then we start and we repeat the entire cycle. That didn't take too long. Good. So hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of the female reproductive system after this whole video. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful day and good luck studying.